All right, then I think we can start. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining. So, today is the follow up session, you can say, of the last session. So, I'll quickly go through, like, briefly, I'll mention the topics that we covered in the last session. Before that, someone please confirm if my audio is clear or not. Okay, thank you. Yes. So in the last session, the mainly we covered what is the MLP and like why do we call it a fully connected network or why do we use nonlinear model. Then we discussed about the multiple layers and basically the structure of it. That this is nothing but a linear transformation, taking an activation function over that. And then what is activation function? Why do we need activation function? We discussed few choices of activation functions that we generally use, like sigmoid function, ReLU, then tanh function, and all those. And after that, we also discussed the problem of underfitting and overfitting. So not only in general context, but mainly in the context of neural network. What is the picture of underfitting and overfitting, and how can we avoid that? So we discussed that. How can we measure whether this problem is there or not? So we discussed about the training error and generalization error, and also like while validating the data, what are the general methods of validating it? It could be dividing the data into three parts, like the validation data, training data, and test data, or it could be cross validation, and there are definitely many other ways. And once we detect the overfitting, how to deal with it? One way was to get into more data, which is not always cost effective. So other ways could be a weight decay method, where we are just adding penalization term to the cost function while minimizing, right? And the other way, the last way that we discussed was the dropout method, where basically we are dropping out few nodes with certain probability so that the expected output remains the same, but the process itself does not depend too much on the data. So that is how what we were doing, that we were dropping out few data or nodes with certain probability. That is also a way to deal with overfitting, right? So after that, today we start with things which are not on the line of overfitting but more on the line of how to find gradient and how to calculate the parameters, how we are actually making the model learn the data. So that is the topic of discussion for today, which includes the parts of forward propagation, back propagation, and all those things. Yes, so the first thing that we cover today is what is forward propagation, what is back propagation, and also computational graph, which is nothing but a visual way of like representing things regarding this propagation forward and back. So the first thing that we cover is what is the forward propagation, which is nothing new in our context. So when we say forward propagation, it is basically calculating every layer on top of the previous layer. So we know that in a very deep network, there are several layers. If we have L many layers, so what we are doing actually, we are feeding nothing but only the x values, right? Other than the x values, we are not having any other input. And once we have the x values, next thing is the parameters, the weight vectors, the weight matrices. So once we have the input, we calculate the first layer, say this HIs, which are nothing but the node values of the first layer, that we calculate in two steps, right? So the first step is to calculate the linear transformation of the input, and in the next step we are just taking the activation function over that linear transformation, or you can say the linear model, so that this HIs or this H values, these are giving me the hidden layer nodes. And after that we are getting the output, which is nothing but a linear transformation of the latest or of the last layer. So while calculating the output, we don't need to take again the activation function, which is the general norm. So this is how we are doing things. Now we can see that at every layer, we are calculating few nodes, and those nodes are used as input for the next layer, and things go on similarly. So that is why this process of calculating every layer value is known as forward propagation. And also in terms of machine learning, what we do is we keep on storing the values of every layer separately in our memory, so that whenever needed we can retrieve those values. And we will see how we can retrieve those and why do we need it again and again. Why do we need to store every layer value separately so that we can calculate the gradient in back propagation? So that is what we see in the back propagation. But the first question before going to the back propagation is that while we can say while estimating the parameters in this particular case, what is the function, what is the cost function that we are minimizing? So in linear model itself, we know that we do minimize some cost. Whenever we are predicting anything, we do minimize some cost. So here, what is that cost that we are minimizing? So definitely, keeping in mind all those discussions regarding the underfitting, overfitting, and the penalty term. Here we are minimizing some loss and some penalty term, and which is we can call it as the objective function, which is something that we are trying to minimize. Now this loss is something that depends on us, on the loss function that we are choosing. So this is some function, some loss function of the output value that we are getting and the actual levels. So how much distant they are or how much similar they are, that is basically measured by my loss. If they are similar, more of my output values are similar to the levels actually. So in that case, we expect lesser loss. Otherwise, we expect a greater loss. So that is how we can define any function, any loss function, and the penalty is something we know. So here let us take the L2 norm as my penalty. So here we take the penalty, say this is my penalty here, where my weight vectors are W1 and W2. Since we are dealing with a one hidden layer model, so we will have two weight vectors, or you can say two parameter vectors. So this F represents Frobenius norm, which is nothing but the sum of squares of the terms of the matrix. So this is the Frobenius norm. And why do we take Frobenius norm? Because we want our cost, or we want our objective function to be built in such a way that while minimizing it, definitely the loss is minimized, definitely this distance is minimized, and also we don't make it very complex, right? We don't make our weight matrices too large, or we don't take very complex structure of our model. So that is why, as we discussed in the last class, that we are also minimizing the weight function, or we are also minimizing the penalty, right? So is there any doubt in this, that why this is my objective function here, or any comment on this? So it could be any other penalty also, but as of now we are doing the calculations using this Frobenius norm or the L2 norm as our penalty, right? So that is just this case. Okay, so once we know what is the target, what is the objective function, the next thing is for the forward propagation. As I mentioned, the computational graph. This is nothing but visualizing what is happening, uh, well, like layer by layer, what is exactly happening. So that is the visualization. For example, here we are starting from the input value, and in the next step we are just multiplying, or you can say like this is any operator. If it is a scalar, excess scalar, then it is scalar multiplication. It could be tensor also. By tensor I mean, for example, if you have a data like, say, say image data you have. So this is say 256 pixels data, 16 cross 16, and now for every you can say grid, you don't have only intensity value, but you have RGB value. So for every grid you have three values, because this is not like black and white picture. You have values on R, G, and B. So in that case, this is not a matrix anymore, or this is not a vector or array, but in that case we represent this particular data as a tensor, where you can say tensor is nothing but a higher dimensional matrix, where it's not only a 2, say, n cross n thing, but it is n cross n cross m. So even it could be of higher dimension as well. So here it is like three dimensional, because you have this m cross n grids, and for each grid you have three many values, so it could be 250, like 16 cross 16 cross 3, right? So that is the dimension of the tensor here, and here it could be a tensor as well. In that case, this multiplication is a tensor multiplication, which is not as simple as vector multiplication, but that makes sense. So the first step is to get the linear transformation z, that is from coming from x and the chosen weight vector or weight matrix. Then from z you are just using the activation function, which gives you h, which is the nodes of the first hidden layer. Then using the node and taking a linear transformation, you get the output. So that up to this, this is just the calculation of the whole mlp. But what do you do with this o, what do you do with this output? So then you calculate the objective function using that. So that is the simple thing, that you have the levels, actual levels, and based on actual levels and your output, you get the loss, which gives you again the objective function when added with the penalty term, right? This is the penalty term. You add the penalty term with the loss and you get the objective function. So that is basically how you uh, make the machine understand how to calculate j based on x. So after we know what is the objective function, the next thing is backpropagation, which is the first thing to understand is why do we need backpropagation, or what is backpropagation. So forward propagation is basically calculating the values of nodes in each layer, and backpropagation is basically to calculate the gradient. So for example, in linear regression also we need to calculate the gradient. Why? Because we want to minimize a function, we want to optimize, we want to find out the values of the parameters which can minimize my cost. So that is why we needed the gradient. So here also the same thing, while estimating the parameters we need to find the gradient, and this is nothing but the backpropagation method, which gives us a way, a mathematical way to find the gradient. So in, if we put it in mathematical terms, we are trying to find out these things, right? This gradient with respect to the two parameter matrices. You can just like this gradients are nothing but matrices only, because j is a scalar and you're differentiating j with respect to two matrices, and this is a case specific to my one hidden layer network. Definitely if we have more hidden layers, our number of gradients will be more. So this is a particular case. Now, how do we find this out? Because even if we have a very deep network, in that case also, my j is the last thing that we are getting from the network, and this parameters, they are somewhere in the like in any layer. So it is not, j is not directly a function of w1. Yes, in j there is w1, but we cannot, like it is hard to express j directly as a function of w1 or directly as a function of w2 also. So what is j basically? J is simply the loss plus the s. Now this loss is a function of what? Loss is a function of output and the levels. And this output can be written as a function of both w1 and w2. Similarly, here this s is directly a function of w1 and w2, because s is nothing but penalty, which depends on both the parameters. So now that is how we can use chain rule to differentiate j with respect to both the w1 and w2, because there we have certain arguments of l and s which depends on both the parameters. So there comes like a calculation which could be a bit more mathematical, but if we go just step by step, the thing is about understanding the idea. So let us understand that what we are doing mathematically here, and why do we need to understand this mathematics, because there are few more things to it which are not that mathematical but more of logical, which can be derived from this whole process. So let us just slowly understand what is happening here. So the first thing, let us calculate this del j, and say with respect to w1, first thing we are calculating this. See, so how can we calculate this? Let us just apply chain rule. So del j del w1, this is nothing but a product of, or you can say just chain rule if you just apply. So that is product of several gradients, right? So how can we break this thing? We can write it as del j del z and del z del w1. because j, you can write j as a directly function of z, and z is a function of w1, so you're just breaking things up. And again j has another argument which is s. S is also a function of w1, so it will be prod of this plus prod of the other argument. So it will be del j del s comma del s del w1, and these things are not difficult to calculate, because this say del j del z is nothing but a simple expression. So first thing, if we want to calculate this del j del z, this is again product of two different things. Here again we are using the chain rule. Why? Because j directly depends on h and h depends on z, because h is the activation function on z, and then on h we are calculating the output and we are getting the j. So basically this is del j del h and then del h del z, which is del j del h into, or you can say product of this, into phi dash z, because h is nothing but phi of z, and you can think of this multiplication as a element wise multiplication. Why element wise? Because phi of z is nothing but, if z is a vector, say z is a vector, if you take phi of it, basically phi is going inside element wise. You are taking phi of every element in z. So that is why this is more of like an element wise multiplication. And del g del h, what is that? That is something which directly we cannot derive unless we know what is the expression of loss function. So del g, this is something that we come back to. So this is crudely the expression for del g del z, del j del z, and again we have this other factors also. So let us try to quickly do that. Next thing, let us go to this del j del o del h. So what is that? That is also again chain rule. So it is del j del o into del o del h. So let us just do this thing, where this del j del o is nothing but w2, sorry, del o del h is nothing but w2, but del j del o is nothing but del, we're just keeping it as it is, because this now depends on my loss function, because j is nothing but sum of my loss function and the s, and loss function depends on the function we choose as the loss function. Nothing, this is nothing but directly argument, for the loss function, o is some direct argument, so we can just differentiate the function with respect to o and we get this expression. Whereas del O del H is W2, because output is directly the linear transformation of H, where my coefficient vector is, or coefficient matrix is W2. So this is the gradient. Now we know what is this, right? This is something we already know. Del J del H into phi dash Z, where del J del H is this. Similarly, let us just see what is the final expression for this next part of it. So say del J del, yeah. So I'm just writing it here. So here we calculated this del j del z, but the other factors are simpler than that, which we can directly write here. So this is something we already have calculated. But see this del z del w1, this is nothing but my x transpose, because this z is nothing but a linear transformation of x, where coefficient vector is w1. So this is my x transpose. And then here this del j del s, this is nothing but my regularization parameter, which is basically lambda. And then this del s del w1, this is w1, like the whole thing, you can say lambda by 2 into 2 w1, because this is nothing but w1 square. So when you take the derivative, it is 2 w1, and my regularization parameter is lambda by 2. So all the remaining things we know, and this is something we have already calculated. So final expression for del j del w1, which is something that again depends on only our parameters and the input. The final expression would be something like this. Now the thing is that we know everything here. This is something we can calculate. This is something we can calculate. And other than that, this is a function of my input, say my input x and the parameter I choose, the regularization parameter I choose, and the parameters. So that is how we can calculate the gradient. And remember that previously we have already stored the values of my updated parameters, and input is definitely something already stored. So we can just retrieve those values and we can calculate gradient at each step. Why this is a back propagation? Because of the chain rule. Because when we are doing the derivative of the output layer with respect to some hidden layer, we are going layer by layer, because directly we can't do it. So the chain rule is used here, and that is why this is known as back propagation. And similarly, I will not show the whole calculation, but exactly the similar way where like we can find out the other gradient also, this del j del w2, which will be something like this, which is a simpler expression and it is more simple to calculate also. So I'm not showing the whole calculation, but this is something we get. Again, this is something we can just depends on my loss, right? So this is how we can just calculate the gradient, and then it depends on my way of doing the optimization, whether we do the minimatch, say stochastic gradient or anything else we use, that depends on us. But this calculating gradient, it depends on the machine, how efficiently we can feed the process to the machine so that it calculates the gradient in minimal time. So that is something on the part of optimization. Now, once we know that this is the back propagation, this is the gradients, what next? Once we understand what are the gradients, what next? The next thing is to understand that how to actually do the machine learning here. So this both forward propagation and the back propagation, they depend on each other in some way. So how they do depend on each other? When we are training the neural network, we start with the initial set of parameters, right? So always there is some initialization and we start with some initial parameters, say W1, W2, we start with, and we already have the X, whatever input we have. Now the first step would be to initialize the parameters. So once we initialize the parameters, the next step is the forward propagation where we calculate the nodes, we calculate the value at every layer. So that is how we can calculate the whole MLP. And finally we calculate the J, which is my objective function. So once we calculate the J, the next thing is to calculate the gradients. Now once we know the gradients, we can use the gradient descent method or like any solving technique to understand the updates of the parameters, because given we already have the initial values, and once we have the updates, we just update the parameters, and then again the same loop goes on. So here, while calculating the forward propagation using the initial values, say W1, W2, we have already calculated the values of every nodes, and the same values will be used here as well. So that is why we need a lot of memory for calculating any MLP and basically for predicting any MLP, because we need to store a lot of data like based on our initialization, that is again used while calculating the gradients. So that is how it can go on unless it converges, unless my prediction converges, and then we stop, and that is the prediction, that is the predicted parameters. So any comment or any doubt on this? Okay. So moving on to the next topic, next thing, that is the numerical stability and initialization. So we talked about the initialization. Definitely, this initialization thing, this has a huge impact on how our model will behave. For example, we are choosing a certain say activation function. So based on that activation function or based on the behavior of the activation function, the initialization would matter a lot. So somehow we can say that the initialization is dependent on the activation function, and similarly the activation function, how will that behave in our say optimization, or you can say in the gradient descent process, that depends on what initialization we chose. So somehow they are interrelated, and whenever we choose a particular, say, activation function, we have to understand that for that activation function, how we can in a very like smart way choose the initialization or the initial values of the parameters. So that is what we discuss. So mainly if we choose wrong initialization, the main problem would be reflected in the gradient. So the gradient would either vanish or it can explode, leading to nowhere. So if the gradient explodes, we it is not possible to find out the optimal value. And similarly, if the gradient vanishes, we can go on and we can't reach the actual value. We can't reach a very like nice say prediction. So that is the problem with the gradient. But how does that happen, and how does it depend on the activation function we choose? First, let us understand what is the problem of vanishing and exploding gradient and why does that happen at the first place. For example, we start with L many layers. Let us take a deep network where we have L many layers, which means we have L minus 1 many hidden layers. So the last layer is the output layer, right? Now we have the input as X, it gives the output O, and at every, say, at the Lth layer, the nodes are represented by HL. So what is HL? HL is coming from the last layer, which is my HL minus 1. So this is some function of HL minus 1, and this function is not fixed for every layer because we can choose different activation function at every layer, right? That is why the function can be different. So I'm just denoting the function as FL because it depends on the layer itself. Now if this is the scenario, then ultimately my output will be nothing but some composite function of the input. So basically from the input at every layer we are taking a function and finally we are getting the output. So the output is nothing but a composite function. And whenever we see a composite function, we understand that while doing the derivative or while differentiating it with respect to the argument, we have to use the chain rule, and using chain rule means multiplying many derivatives, multiplying every level of derivative. So it will look like something like that. So if we just differentiate the output with respect to say the parameter of any particular layer, say small l, then this is nothing but chain rule. We are going layer by layer, and like unless we are reaching that lth layer, so that is that many factors are there that we are multiplying. And if at every layer, this derivatives, they are giving me a matrix because O is something scalar. You can say O is a O is something vector. O is the output. It can be an array of probabilities if we are predicting probability, and then H, that is also a vector. So when we are differentiating, it will give us a matrix, and similarly we are multiplying many matrices, and ultimately this final thing, you can like this is V. It can be array or it can be matrix depending on what data you are feeding. So now, since this is a multiplication of many terms or many similar terms, that is where the problem of explosion or problem of vanishing can come. Just giving you a small example, that suppose I'm multiplying 1, say 100 times. So this will give me 1. So there is no change in the output. But suppose I am just adding a very small change in the input. Small means not that small, but say I'm just doing it with 1.1. So if I take raise it to the power of 100, it will be like it will explode. It will be a huge number, something like this. And crudely, this is the problem of explosion, that suppose you take not 1.1 but say 1.01 to the power 1000. In that case also it will explode. So somehow, even if a very little contamination is there in the data, a little like change is there in the data, if you're multiplying it many times, similar kind of change or similar kind of contamination many times, it can contribute a lot to the explosion or vanishing of the final output. So that is why the problem comes. Similarly, like the same thing happens if it decreases also, like 0.9 to the power 100. This is something like 0.00002. So which is kind of a vanishing problem. Even when every data is not decreasing that much, the final output will decrease a lot. So this can happen. Now the next thing is how the activation function or the choice of activation function is basically contributing. Please avoid this background noise. I can't do anything about that. So yes, how this choice of sigmoid function or whatever rel you say, how is that affecting this vanishing or exploding problem. So suppose we talk about the sigmoid function. So how does sigmoid function behave? So this is the sigmoid function and this is the gradient, how it behaves. Now we can see that for sigmoid function, if the input value is very less or it is very high, the gradient tend to vanish. So that is the main catch, that is the main problem why while choosing sigmoid function we have to be very careful about the data contamination, because if we choose sigmoid function and if there is some problem in my data, then it might happen that finally the gradient will behave in a very vanishing way. It won't explode, but it can vanish in many, unless we are in the Goldilocks zone, which is this part. So this is where the problem comes, the sigmoid gradient problem. It is known as the sigmoid gradient problem, and it is mainly more problematic when we have a deeper network. So one thing is that while dealing with the sigmoid function, most of the times we tend to not choose a deeper network but a wider network, because if we are choosing a deeper network, it means we are multiplying many factors which can like cause explosion or which can cause vanishing of the gradient. And when the gradient is very less, basically you are not finding the optimal value. So that is the problem. The another problem with the gradient could be symmetry. So what is this symmetry problem? Suppose you have, just take a simple case that you have some input x, and say in the first hidden layer we have two nodes. Now this x is a vector, say. Now how we are calculating these two nodes? The first step is to find some linear transformation and then take some activation function on that. So suppose the initial parameters or the initial parameter vector that we choose as c, and we choose c for both the nodes. So basically we are choosing the same initial parameters for both the nodes. Now, someone can say that okay, we can start with anything as initial parameters, but if they are not to be same, then definitely with my updates, it will like it they will fall far apart. Like if the updates are good, then definitely we can expect that this symmetry will break at some point, because no matter what we choose, the model should give us the right thing, but that is not something we can expect from this kind of prediction. Suppose we start with initial value like this, what is happening? At this step, we are taking phi on both nodes. So basically, both nodes, they have the same contribution, which is phi of C transpose X. And combining them, we are getting, say here also, at this step also, we are choosing the same, same value of the parameters, say D and D. So it is basically D of that phi and D of that phi, which finally giving me the output. So this is the forward propagation, where at every step I am calculating everything like the value of the nodes. Now for the backward propagation, what do? We calculate the gradient. But the thing is that my j is depending on both these nodes, and weightage of both the nodes that is same on j. So when we calculate the gradient will be same for both the things. So in the gradient, the contribution of both the factors will be same. So that is why even if we update the say the parameters, the update will be same for both the parameters. Say here and here, the update will be same. So the new parameter will be say C1 and C1, and this will go on. This will go on, and the symmetry will never be broken. Always you will get the same update and you will get the same value of the parameters. But even if in the actual case the same parameters can give you a very bad picture of the prediction, so that is the problem with symmetry, where if the initial values that are chosen, even if randomly chosen, if they are falling very close, then that can build a problem of symmetry, so that the chain of symmetry is never broken. So that is also a problem with initialization. So that is why there is a discussion there, like even now initialization is not something like it's not a very solvable problem, because initialization depends on individual problem. That's why it is still researched a lot. There are few things that we can discuss on parameter initialization, which is there in the book. So there are few ways of doing the initialization. First thing, the most basic thing is the default initialization, where you can choose your parameter randomly from say normal or say some other distribution based on your data. You can think that okay, my parameter can come from this, and if there is some bound on the parameter also, then you can choose the distribution in such a way that the bound is maintained. So that is basically random selection. random selection, and not only random but IID, mostly from the normal. It is basically the default selection mostly from normal, or you can say Gaussian. So that is the default initialization, but that won't work always. Sometimes it can happen that random selection of, say, from Gaussian also, if you select, then it can cause explosion, because the same fact that many small numbers, if you're multiplying those, that can lead to vanishing of the numbers. And similarly, if you're multiplying so many numbers and even a major part of that is more than one, then multiplication of that can basically lead to explosion. So that is why choosing from normal random variables can lead to explosion or vanishing also. There is another initialization which is not ad hoc, like which is not random, which is random, but the parameters of the distribution, that is something depends on your data. So what is the Xavier, say Xavier initialization? So the first thing is, suppose we say, as of now we assume that there is no non-linearity. So if there is linearity at every layer, because why we are assuming linearity? Because if the problem is there with the linearity, the problem will be there with non-linearity also. What is the problem that we will mention? So suppose we have two layers. So this is my layer where outputs are there. Suppose we are denoting the outputs as x, and sorry, input as x and output as o. So in from x to o we go by linear transformation. Basically oi is nothing but, oi is the ith node of this final layer. So oi is some linear, say, function of the x nodes. So that is j from 1 to n in, where n in is basically number of nodes in the input layer. Okay. Now the thing is that this weights are something that we need to decide. Suppose we are choosing the weights randomly from a distribution with mean 0 and variance sigma square, not necessarily normal, it can be anything based on our requirement. So that is something we choose. Now xj, suppose xj is also something that is coming from a distribution, say with mean 0 and some finite variance, and they are independent, because there is no reason to choose them dependent. So we are assuming that they are independent. Now if this is the scenario, this is a particular case where my weights are also coming from a distribution, the data like inputs are also coming from some other distribution and they are independent. In that case, what is the behavior of o, or what is the behavior of output? So definitely the expectation of oi will be 0, that we can clearly see. And what is the variance of oi? So if we just calculate the variance, it's nothing but, like, since the expectation is 0, so expectation of this whole square, and that will ultimately be summation of variances of each term, and that will ultimately give us something like this. Okay. So if this is the case, now n in is something that is fixed. Number of input nodes in the previous layer is something that we know, that we decide. Sigma square is something that we decide, but tau square is not necessarily something that we decide. So now if this n in is very high, then the variability can explode. This is something fixed, say. So if this n in is very high, if we do not choose sigma square sufficiently small, in that case, this whole thing can basically shoot up when my number of nodes is rising. So how can we choose sigma square? Sigma square is in our hand, because definitely whenever we are training a model, we should build a model which can work well even when this n in is high, because definitely we will deal with consistency also. So not only in terms of the data size, also in terms of how it works when the number of nodes is rising. So that is also a question. So that's why we can't restrict n in to be finite, or at least to be very small, but we can restrict sigma square somehow. So if we choose sigma square in a way so that n in into sigma square is equal to 1, that can solve my problem. That can at least restrict this variance. The variability will not be very high, but there is a problem that this oi variance of OI depends on both n in and sigma square. But while doing the back propagation, while we are doing the calculating the gradients and all, then also we can see that the, say in back propagation, we have two layers, where here we have the OIs, the outputs, and here we have the ZIs, which is linear transformation of the previous layer. So for forward propagation, we are going from here to here, and from back propagation, we will, while finding the gradient, we will go from here to here. So in that case, the weights, which are WLs, ultimately this WL into the gradient of the this layer will give us the gradient of the previous layer. So somehow the previous layer, the gradient of the last layer will give us gradient of the next layer. So somehow the gradient itself is also a linear form of gradient of the last layer, and where the coefficient is WL itself. So here also, just I'm not giving a greater mathematical detail, but somehow here also, using keeping in mind that the gradient can also come from a distribution with 0 and say tau square variance, ultimately we will get that this variance of output or gradient of that will be some n in into sigma square into some tau square, where tau square is not distribution of input but gradient of the last layer, something like that. So the gradient will depend on again n in and sigma square, because gradient is also some function of some linear function of the weights itself. So if weight is coming from say sigma square, 0 sigma square, then the gradients will also depend on this sigma square, and n in will definitely be there because it is coming from the last, sorry, I'm extremely sorry, it is n out, because gradient is basically back propagation. So gradient of one layer will depend on gradient of the next layer, right? So in that case, it will be n out into sigma square, because this gradient of this layer will come from gradient of this layer. So that is why this is also a relation. Now here also tau square is something fixed, we can't change it, but we can change sigma square. If n out is very large, then the whole thing will be very high, whereas my gradient will behave very, it can behave like in not so nice way, because in that case the variability is rising high. So how can we restrict sigma square then? Then we have to restrict this n out into sigma square. We can say that this should be 1. Then that is a way. So there is a trade-off whether we should choose sigma square like this, or whether we should choose sigma square like the previous case. So that is why a well-used choice of sigma square is that where we use both n in and n out. So both the numbers. So where this sigma square is usually chosen as say sigma square into this n in plus n out by 2. This whole thing is equal to 1. That is the constraint that we select, and that is how we can choose some sigma square, where sigma square is 2 by n in plus n out. So at each layer, whatever the weights are, that depends on the number of nodes of the previous layer and the number of nodes of the next layer, in this way. So if we choose the sigma square like this, it is highly likely that the problem of explosion will not come. So that is a proposal. That is not that it always works, but that is a proposal that at least works better in most of the cases than the default selection. So there are other proposals also, that sigma can be just chosen from uniform minus 6 by n in plus n out. This is basically something that is mostly famous, uh, and this is used mostly. Xavier finally proposed this particular choice, because anything can work if sigma is basically something not that like inversely proportional to n in plus n out. So that is why this choice is popular. But definitely there are many other literatures on that. So this book does not cover all of that in detail. So going to the next topic, which is something I'll cover in very brief, which is environment and distribution shift. Any doubt from the last part that we discussed? Okay. So, what is this environment and distribution shift? It is basically talks about what if after building some model, and suppose I am a particular company who works with a particular model. My say my process, my quality control, and everything depends on a particular model, a particular neural network which decides something. So what if the say the distribution which is underlying my model, what if that distribution changes, or what if the environment changes? For example, COVID. When COVID came, so many companies, they had to change their models, they had to update their models, because in that case the new data, or what we say as new normal, that affected the models a lot, or the model behavior, model performances a lot. So definitely that is a kind of a cut point where we have to detect things, and that is the problem exactly, where the environment or the distribution changes. So how can it change? For example, it can be the covariate shift. And what is covariate shift? It says that suppose we have the data input x's and output o. Now this labeling, it does not change, but the distribution of x changes. Somehow previously x used to behave in a certain way, now x behaves in some other way. But for each x, this output behavior is not changing, but x behavior of the x is changing. For a typical example could be this, that suppose my model, when I'm building the model, for example, I'm trying to detect whether the image is that of a dog or a cat. Now previously I used to get images like this, kind of realistic images, so that is on which I have trained my model. But suppose after a certain time, people used to feed only this kind of cartoon images to detect whether this is a cat or a dog. So, in this new trend, my model might not behave very nicely, because the training data is completely based on the such kind of realistic images, whereas now the taste data is something different. So, definitely there is a covariate shift, because image like this, distribution of image like this will be quite different from distribution of images like this. So in that case, we need to just take into account of that problem, and this is known as the covariate shift, where still like my output distribution is same. The second thing would be the level shift, where the output itself is changing. For example, previously I used to say, for example, cars. When I'm dealing with data on cars, and I'm dealing with data on mileage basically. So previously I had a data in my mind that okay, there is a certain threshold below which I would say that the car is not giving a good mileage. Now that threshold can change. Previously the cars that used to be labeled as low mileage cars, now maybe I'm labeling that as a average mileage car. So in that case the level shift can happen, where the distribution of y is changing. And the last thing that I would mention regarding shift is the concept shift, which is the most, I would say, most prevalent problem. So, what is concept shift? This is basically changing of definition when we are dealing with a disease. Suppose previously I have the data on Y and X, where Y gives me that when I would say that a person is diabetic, or when I would say that a person has certain psychological disorder, or a psychological help is needed for a certain person, that is my y say, and x is definitely certain characteristics of that person. Now for a certain disease the definition can change based on all the ongoing researches, and that is something the pharma companies face a lot. They start their model with the definition that is already there, and after a certain time, after certain research, definition of certain diseases change, their parameters change, and then the model might not behave nicely, and then the model basically needs to get a lot of updated data to I would say, to retune it. So that is another problem. So in this book, this is the last unit of this chapter, where I would end with the example that this book gives about this shift and what kind of problem may happen. So the that is a real incident, the example that it gives. So it is about a pharma company. Sorry, this is about a uh, okay. There are many examples. I would say the second one. So this is about a, say, a bank basically. So, what was the problem with the bank? They started a model which basically detects that which customers, or which who can basically repay the loan, any loan. It is not necessarily even for credit card. Also, they used to use the same model, that who can repay the loan and for whom the default will be there. So it is who will repay versus default. That is the classification. So that was a very simple model, but there was a problem that they in the covariates there was a particular covariate that what is the shoe that the customer is wearing when he or she is coming to the bank. So that was a very difficult kind of covariate to use, and that covariate had a lot of spurious correlation to many other covariates. So finally, the model was behaving in such a way that whenever a person is wearing Oxford shoe or say some formal shoe, uh, for that person the chance of repayment is very high. And whenever a person is wearing a Snickers or some casual shoe, for that person the model is giving the probability of default very high. So that was a problem, and more what was more problematic is that the customer somehow understood this, that the bank is giving loan based on this. And after a certain time, everyone in this bank used to go with formal shoes, and the model used to grant them loan, like grant loan to all of them. And the bank understood that something is very wrong, something very wrong is happening, the default rates is rising, we are giving loan to wrong people. Then they had to like review the whole model, and it took a lot of time. And definitely they lost a lot of money in the whole process because they did not understood the covariates, the main problem with the covariates. And just another example which is also very important regarding a pharma company, that particular pharma company, they were trying to devise a medicine regarding diabetes. And for that they needed blood samples of both healthy and sick people, diabetic people of a certain age. Now it is very difficult to collect blood sample of healthy aged people, because healthy aged people, why will they give you blood? They will not go to blood donation, or they will not, usually they will not uh, come to like for blood test because they're healthy. So that is why they had the data of sick people, they had the data for diabetic people, but they did not have the data for healthy people. And what they did is they collected healthy people blood sample from a college blood donation camp, where everyone giving blood is like adult, young adult. So in that case, their training data was nothing but set of two data, where the group one data, which is like the sick people data, is coming from aged group, and the healthy people data is coming from young group. So on that, the model trained very well. But whenever the test data came in, whenever basically in the test data they had healthy people data and sick people data both from the aged group. So in that case, the model could not perform well because there is a complete covariate shift. The X distribution is changing, because for the healthy people of the aged group, the distribution will be totally different from the healthy people of the young group. So this kind of problems we may face if we do not understand the challenges that can be imposed by the covariate selection. So that is another topic which will be covered in a later chapter in more detail, and also this shifts how we can deal with it. There is a part of it in this chapter which is kind of very mathematical, and which we will not require that to cover the later chapters. So as of now, I'm just keeping that. And just tell me if you have any doubt or any comment.